This video had a glitch in the middle of it. Sometimes the thing stops recording. If it happens really close in the beginning, I record the whole thing over. If it happens in the middle or towards the end, what I do is I edit to a good place, chop off a little bit, and then start up. In this case, it ended at the end of a quote. That's not a bad place. So there's a place in the middle where Alice, the queen, is talking, and then it jumps. Anyway, when I was going to assemble it, I accidentally took the first part and the second part, I put them around backwards. I realized this before I saved it and ruined the files that I was working on. And I assembled it correctly. But there was a movement in art and literature where what people did was they took the work of art and they cut it apart. And so you'd have a collage. But what these artists would do is they would paint a picture and then it would cut up the picture and then rearrange the pieces, kind of like those sliding puzzles. And they would put more stuff on top of it and make a whole piece that was a collage of it. And people have done this with writing, where they would go and they would write a story and they would just randomly cut the paper, rearrange the pieces, and then put that in as the story. And it's kind of just jarring, and it's kind of disjointed and jarring, and it comes across much like Alice in Wonderland did. Back in the old days, before computers were prevalent, so when, Pop and Lolly were learning in school and such, we had to write on big reports. And when we were to write on the big reports, what we would do is we would write it out on one piece of paper, on one side of a piece of paper. And then if we needed to rearrange paragraphs, what we could do is we could take scissors and we could cut the paragraphs apart, and we could rearrange them and tape them down or paste them down to another sheet of paper. And then we would copy that to make the final thing. But now with computers, it's like you highlight the text, or on the phone, you highlight the text and you go copy, or you go cut. And cut is just like cutting the original pieces of paper, and then you would paste it down in a different spot. So this is, that's the origin of cut, copy, and paste. And because back in the day, you were literally pasting pieces of paper down to other pieces of paper, hopefully in a better order than they started out with. I do that a lot, but I do it electronically. I no longer use tape and paste, but that was actually a thing. The queens were questioning Alice to see if she was a proper queen. And they were asking her all sorts of questions. And it's like, can you add? And Alice is like, yeah, I can add. It's what's 1 plus 1 plus 1, and went on. I think I got the right number of ones in there. I mentally went along 1 and 1 and 1 and 1 and. So I think I got all 10. I don't know if I missed one or not. Doesn't matter. Just as funny either way. And then there was a subtraction problem. What happens if you take 9 from 8? Now, this is kind of an advanced math thing. Not advanced, but this is a more advanced math thing than an 8-year-old like Alice would be expected to know and understand. It's the concept of a negative number. So this is something that you don't really encounter much that you don't encounter in the physical world. But it shows up a lot in bookkeeping. Well, unfortunately, it shows up a lot in bookkeeping, where you subtract one number from a larger number, or a larger number from a smaller number, and you're left with something that's called a negative number. And so what happens is, if you just subtract down through 0. So if you start out with 5 and you subtract 5, you end up with 0. You start out with 5 and you subtract 6, you end up with -1, because you count down 5, 4, or 4, take off the first one, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So that's the 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. So you end up at 0. And you subtract one more, that's negative 1. And if you subtract 7 from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0, negative 1, negative 2. Which is the same thing you get if you just take the inverse, the negative of 7 minus 5. So if you have 7 minus 5 is 2. So 5 minus 7 is negative 2. And that works because you end up multiplying both sides by negative 1, and you multiply a subtraction by negative 1, it flips the order of it. Which is a really kind of cool thing. And then they ask, what happens if you take a dog away from a bone? Well, Alice got that one mostly right. The dog gets mad, and the dog runs away with the bone. Now, and the dog runs away because he doesn't have his bone. But the dog also loses his temper, and so the temper stays. That's kind of a clever joke. And they ask, how is bread made? And Alice is like, you start with flour, F-L-O-U-R, which ground up wheat. But the queens interpreted it as F-L-O-W-E-R. And it's like, well, where do you pick the flour? It's like, no, you don't pick it, it's ground. Oh, how much ground? 10 square feet, 12 square feet? And so, once again, they interpret it wrong. And that's a big part of Alice in Wonder, or of Through the Looking Glass, and Alice in Wonderland, the book that came before it, is that there's all of these places where words mean, well, puns, really, where a word has one sound, and homonyms, the use of homonyms, that's it. Two words that sound the same are homonyms, or homophones. And so because they sound the same, you can confuse them. And here the confusion is being done intentionally for comedic purposes. Because, getting something intentionally wrong can be a little bit funny. It can also be distressing. And so here you have that come up later with Alice at the door. So she comes up to a door that says Queen Alice. And there's a bell for servants, and there's a bell for visitors, but there is no bell for the Queen. So she knocks. Now, if you were to think about this, she shouldn't have knocked. The door is hers because it has her name on it. So therefore, because the door is hers, she should just open it. And she didn't think of that, so she knocked on the door because she didn't want to ring the wrong bell. And she asks who answers the door. And a frog comes up. The frog is out of nowhere, wearing boots and a yellow suit. It is totally weird, but it says...
Totally?
Total. Oh, I didn't see what I did there. Yes, that is totally weird. I've lost it. I'm done. No, which is weird. And she's like, who answers the door? So answering the door is when someone knocks at the door, rings the doorbell or whatever. Answering the door is referring to answering the person on the other side of the door's request to enter or request to be acknowledged, or it's it's acting the sin, acknowledging the signal. So anyway, so it's answering the door. So who answers the door? And the frog is like, well, who talked to the door? Door didn't talk to you. He's like, you shouldn't knock it, and then he kicks it, which is just, again, it's weird. But the whole thing is weird. And she has this song welcoming her in, drinking glasses of treacle and ink, which sounds nasty. Probably, well, it may not be that nasty. The ink at the time was probably India ink, which is sort of based on iron, so it would have sort of a metallic taste. It's not that bad of a taste. I've accidentally tasted it before. Art class, we did pen and ink or pencil and ink drawings. So what you do is you have the sheet of paper and you draw out what you want to do in pencil, and then you go over it with ink. And part of this was teaching us how to use the ink. So we had the old-fashioned fountain pens, like you see in the cartoons. So it was like this wooden stick with a little metal nib that's kind of shaped like a spade, with a thin slot down the middle and a tiny little bubble. And you take this and you dip it into the inkwell, the little inkwell, and then you write. And the tiny bubble of ink drains down the little channel and it spills out ink. Oh, Lolly has a fountain pen. So this is a more modern version of it. This, you don't have to dip in ink, do you?
No.
No. So this you don't actually have to dip in ink. It has an ink cartridge, so the ink just goes down. But that's what it looks like, with the little hole and the groove.
Ollie has real ones too.
Lolly has real ones too. But anyway, so you draw it with pencil, and then you go over it with the ink pen. And I chew on pens sometimes, and I made the mistake of sticking the ink in my mouth, and purple mouth, or black mouth. It looks terrible. I wasn't the only one, so I feel better about that. You know, out of 80 kids, there were 3 of us with just like black. But it doesn't taste that bad. Now treacle is molasses. So molasses, very sweet, a little bitter, a little salty. It's made from refined sugar cane. But treacle and molasses would be, or treacle and ink would be pretty good. And let's see. Oh, the queens. One of the things with the testing of the queens were like, we have to test you to see if you're a real queen. But halfway through, they just started calling her queen and respecting her as one. And then they invited each other to her party. And that's, you'd never invite yourself to somebody's party. That's just, even I know that's bad manners. So never invite yourself to someone's party. Don't invite other people to parties unless, you know, it's like, hey, come on over to the party and bring a friend. Well, then you bring a friend. But don't just say, hey, I'm coming. And, oh, by the way, I'm bringing 50 people and they're bringing 50 people. That's, no. No. No good. Yes, well. Anyway, that is my thoughts on Chapter 9.